Welcome and good morning, dear students. My name is Dr. Shuaib Mohammad Bhat. I'm working as Assistant Professor in the Department of English at Institute of Aeronautical Engineering, Hyderabad. Today in this video lecture, we shall be talking about an important topic, that is communication process. You may have noticed in the previous classes we talked about communication. We talked about forms of communication or types of communication. There we talked about verbal and non-verbal communication in detail. Today, we shall be now looking upon the process, what communication process is. So before we go with the communication process, it's compulsory to have a glimpse on what communication is. Because in order to speak, communication is a process. That really is. There is a proper mechanism, there is a proper strategy, there is a proper channel by which all this communication occurs. It's not like something God has given us the ability to communicate and we are communicating. No, it is a process. To share something with other person, to speak something to other person, to convey something to other person, it requires a proper, there is a proper mechanism is there. It's not something like I have my mouth, I have tongue, I have other parts which are required to communicate, and I do communicate and the listener is having ears, he or she listens and understands it. It's not like this. It's not as easy. It's not so straightforward. There is a mechanism behind it. We shall be looking upon that mechanism which is required for communication process, which makes our communication possible, which makes a speaker to be understood, and which allows listeners to understand the speaker. We shall be looking upon that mechanism in this class. So before we directly jump to communication process, let's go with communication, what communication is. So communication is simply, it is sharing of ideas. It is sharing of it is transferring of ideas. It's conveying information, emotions, feelings to other person or to other people. It may not be one person only, it may be many people, it may be more persons to whom we are sharing, it may be a group of people. So communication is to share ideas, is to convey our ideas, is to share our information, is to share our thoughts, feelings, ideas to other people. It's all about sharing. So it is, we are humans because we communicate. We share our ideas. We talk to people. We show our sufferings to people. We discuss our happy mood or happy situations or happy events with the people. So this all is possible because of communication. Then, now let's go with the definitions now. Definition of communication. We have the definition by Keith Davis. So Keith Davis defines communication as a process of passing information and understanding from one person to another. So Keith Davis says, it is to pass information. Communication is a process by which we pass information and understand, by which we pass information from one person to another person. It is passing information and understanding one person. It's not like communication, if I only pass my information and if I do not understand you, that may not be called a perfect communication. Because communication is incomplete if we do not understand each other. Or if the people who are having communication, who are busy with the communication, if they do not understand each other. Communication is impossible without understanding each other. So what communication according to Keith Davis is, it is to pass information and it is to understand each other. So what we pass our ideas, our information, our feelings, our emotions. So whatever the stuff we want to convey, we want convey to others, we want to discuss with others, that is information. So communication is a process by which we share information, by which we pass information, and we understand each other. That's communication. Now we have another definition which is given by this group of writers, where we have Murphy, where we have Hildebrandt, Thomas. So they are of the view that communication is a process of transmitting and receiving verbal and non-verbal messages, and it's considered effective when it achieves the desired response or reaction from receiver. So we have another definition which says communication is a process of transmitting and receiving verbal and non-verbal messages. Because communication is not only the communication which we do by the word of mouth. That only is not communication. Communication involves, or it includes, non-verbal communication as well. Communication which is done by body language. Communication which is done by facial expressions, body gestures. Communication which is done by eye contact. Communication which is done by vocalics, by paralinguistics, by our tone, by our speed, by stress patterns. So communication, it is a process of transmitting and receiving verbal and non-verbal messages. So we transmit and we receive verbal and non-verbal messages. It's considered effective when it achieves the desired response or reaction from the receiver. And this communication is considered effective. It's only effective when it achieves the desired response or reaction from the receiver. Because see, we cannot speak that this communication is complete, it is successful, if the communication is not understood by the receiver. If we do not get the feedback from the receiver, it is the feedback of the receiver which indicates whether the communication was successful or not. It is the feedback of the receiver which tells us whether the receiver has understood us or not. So communication is a process by which we transmit information, by which we receive information, and this can be done by both verbal and non-verbal communication, and it is considered effective. Communication is considered effective only when it achieves the desired response or reaction from the receiver. So communication is complete only when it caters the needs of the receiver. When a receiver is satisfied with the communication, then only communication is complete. It's perfect. Now, I would like to talk about Peter Little. Peter Little, he defines communication as the process by which information is transmitted. It is a process by which information is transmitted between individuals or organizations so that an understanding response results. It's a process in which information is shared, it's transmitted between individuals or organizations so that an understanding response results. So that both the parties, they reach to a conclusion, they reach to an understanding. See, every communication has a purpose. Every speaker has a purpose, either to inform audience or listeners, or to just persuade them, or to educate them, or to make them aware about any issue or any change, any topic. So when this communication, when it reaches to an understanding, when a speaker makes the audience to get that thing which he expects to convey to the audience, then only we can say it is communication. Otherwise, it is a waste of noise. It is a useless noise. If I speak in front of you for one long hour, you are not understanding me, and I'm not getting you. I'm not understanding you people. So this process cannot be called the communication. It is a useless noise which we are making, because communication has a purpose to be understood and to understand people. That is what Peter Little said, or what he says. Then we have another two people, William Newman and Charles Summer. They say communication is an exchange of ideas, facts, opinions, emotions, or two or more persons. He simply just summed up the crux of communication in these two lines. He says communication is exchange of ideas. We exchange ideas with the help of communication. Or when we exchange ideas with any medium, that's communication. It's facts, it's opinions, emotions. When we share them with any channel, with any medium, that's communication. So by communication, we exchange our ideas, we exchange our opinions, we exchange our facts. Then John Adair, another person, influential person, he speaks, communication is essentially the ability of one person to make contact with another and make himself or herself understood. You will see all these definitions, they speak one thing but in different senses. So all these definitions, they are elaborating only on this idea that it is sharing of ideas or sharing of any stuff. But every person, every linguist is speaking his or her point in his or her own way. Small digressions are there, but the main content is one, that is to share, that is to be understood, and that is to understand people. So what is John's claim? Communication is essentially it is an ability. He calls it an ability of one person or of speaker to make contact with another and make himself or herself understood. If you have the ability to contact other people, what is contact? That is to talk, to share, to get involved with people. So when you have this ability and when you make yourself understood to the people, that's communication. And that is the ultimate goal of communication. When you speak and you want that, and when you are understood by the people, understood to the people, that is communication. That is the ultimate goal of communication. So this is what John Adair says. He says it's an ability of a person to make contact with another and make himself or herself understood. So this is what these different people share about communication. Now, after going through all these definitions, we come to know that it is a process of transmitting. Communication is a process of transmitting. It is a process of exchanging. It is a process of sharing. What? Information, ideas, thoughts, feelings, emotions, so on and so forth, some other stuff. We share it through speech, we share it through signals, we share it through behavior, and we share it through writing. Or I can say, we share it through verbal and non-verbal mode of communication. What is verbal? Verbal is the communication done by word of mouth, done by words. And words can be both used in oral speaking and words can be used in written form. So we can say oral communication and written communication, they both form verbal communication. What is non-verbal communication? That is communication which is not done by the word of mouth, which is not done by words. That means which is not done by oral communication, which is not done by written communication. Then how do we communicate without oral words or without this written communication? How do we communicate? Yes, we communicate with the help of certain signals, with our behavior. So though these signals and behavior, it all comes in non-verbal communication, where we use our body language, where we use facial expressions, Different expressions are there. To show anger, we make different expression of face. A happy face is always, it displays a smile. So that's another mode of communication. When we are pleasant, we are happy with our listeners, we offer them a pleasant face, a pleasant facial expression. When we are angry with anybody, we just create an angry expression on our face. So different body postures, we communicate with body postures. Even we communicate with paralinguistics. Paralinguistics or vocalics, which means with the tone, with the pitch, with the speed, we talk to the people. It has its own impact. So that's what I'm telling you. Communication is a process of transmitting or exchanging or sharing ideas, information, thoughts, feelings, emotions through verbal and non-verbal communication. Verbal is speech or writing. Through non-verbal communication, signals, different signals. Traffic signal is also a non-verbal mode of communication. We come to know about different points, different ways because of traffic signals. So we speak through verbal and non-verbal communication. I hope you have understood what communication is. Now let's see what is this communication process. I told you communication, we should not underestimate it. It's not like I want to deliver a lecture and I have to come and I have to speak. Oh, there is a proper channel, there is a proper process. This message is not being delivered randomly. A good speaker follows a proper process of the communication. That process includes these elements. Number one is sender. We have encoding. Encoding is required. Message is required. Channel is required. And receiver is required. And then decoding is required. And most important, feedback is required. So these are the different elements which we require for the process of communication. So this is not like, as I told you, communication is a random process which can happen by its own. That's not the case with communication. Now see, the above figure, it shows that one can safely conclude that communication is carried out not only pass on information but ultimately to get a feedback. So communication is not only to pass the information. I'm not only here to vomit everything which I know about communication and I will leave. No, that's not communication. Communication is to get feedback from people. I need to get feedback from you. When I'm getting feedback from you, that will allow me, or that will show me what is the status of my communication with you. So feedback is very important in every communication process. Why? Because it distinguishes communication from information. Communication is something else, and sharing information is something else. When we share information, that means we don't bother about the feedback. We don't bother about that, like were we understood or not, because our duty is to share, to speak. But communication is to share and be understood, so that to be understood we can get when we receive feedback from our listeners. So communication is different, and only to part information is different. To part information, to share information, that is different. So when there is feedback, the communication process is complete and it makes it meaningful. Communication process is only complete when there is feedback, because feedback gives you the satisfaction, or it tells you how successful you were while communicating your idea or while sharing your idea with your listeners. It tells you what are your strong points and what are your weak points. It tells you what sort of attention you need to give to your listeners. It tells you how much examples or how illustrious you need to be with your audience or with your listeners. So this can be done only when we have feedback with us, when we are doing the communication which includes feedback. Then the process of communication, let's see. See, communication is a two-way process involving the following elements. It's a two-way process, I told you. Communication is not only where we require an efficient speaker who can speak. We require both the parties and we require the mental and physical presence of both the parties. A speaker should speak effectively, and the listeners, they must try to listen carefully. Listening itself means understanding. So when I speak, they must listen carefully means they must listen and understand carefully. So communication is a two-way process. We require both speaker and listener, speakers and listeners. So it requires these elements like sender, message, medium, channel, receiver, response, and feedback. So it is not sufficient to have just all these elements. There should be cooperation and understanding between the two parties involved. Now we have all the elements. I have a speaker. I have a message. He knows how to encode. I have a proper channel. I have receiver or receivers. They are sending me the feedback. This only is not required for communication. Communication requires something more than these elements. That is cooperation and understanding between the two parties. When the two parties are not having cooperation, what is this cooperation? You are writing a letter to a person who lives in some other country. You are first time talking to some other person whom you do not know, who is totally stranger to you. How can you build or how can you show the cooperation? So there is one way. Before you speak to that person, you should try to research about that person. If that person is totally foreign to you, but if he holds a designation, you should know the value of that designation. You should know the status of that chair, responsibilities of that chair, so that you can see, you can look, or you can guess the personality of that person. So cooperation and understanding of both the parties who are in communication is necessary for communication process, apart from the elements which we require for communication process. Then it's important to have a common frame of reference or context for successful and meaningful communication. We should have a common frame of reference or context. Common frame of reference or context, what does it mean? It means a common language or common interpretation of gesture. It is better if we, not better, but it is required. It's not only better, but it is required. The party with whom we are communicating must know the language in which we are communicating. So that means we should have a common language. Then only we can expect, yes, we may be understood. Because we share a common language. When we are speaking a common language, there are chances we may be knowing all the pros and cons of language. We may be knowing all the complex structures of language. And when we are knowing those things, we can be easily understood, or we can easily understand each other. And common interpretation of gestures. There should be a common interpretation of gestures, because see, in one culture a gesture means something else, but if you go to the other culture or to the other place, the same gesture is used is being used for other meaning. So it should be written, it should be the communication where people use, where people interpret where people interpret gestures in a common way. So then only communication can be possible. Essentially, communication involves the sender or the communicator or the receiver. Both should necessarily share a mutually accepted code that I told you, that is language, And the context in which communication takes place is called communication environment. So we require the most essential elements are a sender and a receiver. We require these two parties at any cost. Every communication is incomplete without a sender and a receiver. And without these two things, there should be common language between these two parties and the context in which the communication takes place. The context in which this communication is taking place, it's called communication environment. The content of the code is sent in a certain medium. The content of the code, the content of the code means this message is sent in a certain medium. It's like oral, written, or non-verbal. Oral written means verbal. Using we use channels like ear, telephones, mics, body language, pictures, text. Different channels we are using. In the form of encoded messages, the code is not restricted to only language. It may also involve use of costumes, gesture, colors, and among other things. The message which we encode, it's not only encoded, or it cannot only encoded in the text form only. It can be encoded with the help of costume, with the help of gestures, with the help of colors, or other things. So we can encode a message not only within a text, not only with the help of words, but with the help of certain gestures, certain colors, because colors also speak, gestures also speak, costume also speaks. Then, the process of communication can be described in the following manner. The sender sends a message. This is how we can describe the process of communication. The sender sends a message. Then, he uses a medium and he uses a channel and sends the message to the receiver. The message arrives in the sensory world of the receiver. It is in the sensory world. It goes to your brain. The receiver's brain filters the message on the basis of his or her knowledge, emotions, attitudes, and gives the message a unique meaning. That's why we need to research the receiver. Because the receiver interprets the message according to his mood, according to his emotions, attitudes, and according to his knowledge. A receiver puts forth or turns the message into a meaning. So this is important to know your audience, know your receiver first. This message may trigger a response which the mind of the receiver forms. And this message, it triggers a response in the mind of receiver. The receiver creates a response. When you listen to me, there may be a response like, "Sir, can you please elaborate this thing?" It's a response. "Sir, we 100% understood you well." This is a response. "Sir, we are not agreeing with you." This is a response. So it comes in the mind of receiver. The receiver encodes his or her response and sends it across as feedback in the sensory world of the sender. Then again the communication process begins. The sender receives the feedback, and feedback again goes in the sensory world of the sender. This completes one cycle of communication, and the process continues in a cyclic manner. So when a sender sends a message, the receiver receives it, responds it, sends the feedback. So this is one cycle of communication. So communication happens in this cyclic form, in this cyclic manner. So cycle after cycle is there as long as the people involved care to communicate. Now then the feedback is being sent to receiver. Then again receiver sends the clarification. Then further clarification. So this is all the cyclic manner of communication. There are 6 steps which we require for communication process. Number 1 is ideation or sender. The first step in the communication cycle is to have idea with the sender. The first element which we require, that is sender. We should have a sender. So that what sender will do? Sender will send a message. Sender can send a message. He can share an idea. So the first thing which we require for communication process is sender. Second is encoding. And what will be encoded? That is a message. See, the idea is converted into a message which can be transmitted. Now the idea which is in the mind of the sender, it can be converted into a message by sender. While encoding, the sender must be use comprehensible symbols and signs. Encoding is one of the important processes, one of the important elements. When you encode a message, you need to use those symbols and those signs only, or that text only, which can be easily understood by your audience or by your listener or by your reader. Because if your reader is not successful in reading you, so faulty communication will happen. And one need to know the audience. We should have the knowledge of audience. What is their mindset? Which language they know most? What is their status about different sentences? Are they understanding them or not? Otherwise, it would be like this. See, there is an example. The example is, Rahul went to hill station and saw monkeys on picnic. This is a sentence. If I tell you to decode the sentence, you will decode it with a faulty interpretation also. Because I am telling you Rahul went to hill station and saw monkeys on picnic. Now the question is, who was on picnic? Rahul went to hill station and saw monkeys on picnic. If you use your logic, it means Rahul went to hill station and he saw monkeys there. It was Rahul on picnic and he saw monkeys there. But if the sentence will be given to a person who doesn't know that only humans can go to picnic, he can interpret the sentence in this way: Rahul went to hill station. Rahul went to hill station for any work and he saw monkeys on picnic. He saw their monkeys, they were on picnic. Is it so? Yeah, this is called faulty encoding of message. So encoding should be done with care, with 100% attention, so that your listeners may not decode you falsely. There must be a proper decoding of your message. So that's why I'm telling you, encoding is much required. It requires more attention of the sender. Encoding is not something you are putting words all together or you are putting symbols all together without any care or attention. So encoding requires that the receiver should be taken on board while encoding a message. The language should be used which can be easily understood by the receiver. Then the third one is channel. The message is transmitted through a proper channel or media. Proper channel is required. Proper care should be taken while choosing the channel, otherwise there is possibility of miscommunication. How do you communicate? Is it a face-to-face communication? Or is it a video calling? Are you sending a letter to a person? So what sort of channel you are using? So channels should be used, proper care should be given, should be taken while choosing the channel. If we are choosing improper channel, that again would be a faulty mode of communication. Then we have receiver. So there is also a receiver who receives the message. And then comes another important stage, that is decoding. So decoding also requires the intention of sender. When you decode a message, you should know who the receiver is, what is his mindset, what he knows about the language in which he has encoded the message. So after receiving the message, the receiver has to understand the original idea. And for this, the receiver will decode the message. So we should try to know, we should have that capability by which a receiver can understand the exact idea on which the whole message has been constructed. So decoding also requires proper attention. Decoding requires that sender should be taken on board so that a proper decoding may happen. Otherwise, there would be a proper decoding. Then is the feedback, which is much necessary. In feedback, the receiver has to convey, the receiver has to convey his message back to the sender. Now the receiver is showing his response back to the sender. That's called feedback. And in this stage, the receiver becomes the sender. And he needs to go through all the above steps to send the feedback. You have heard the message, you have decoded the message, now you are sending feedback to the sender. So when you are sending feedback to the sender, now you are becoming the sender of the message. And when you are the sender of the message, you have to follow all the 6 points. You have to follow proper encoding, proper channel, proper ideation. So that is why I told you communication is a cyclic process. So while sending feedback, a receiver becomes a sender. Then, importance of feedback in communication. Why is this feedback important? It completes the process of communication and makes it continuous. It completes, your feedback makes a communication process. When you are telling me at the end, sir, we understood you well, we are satisfied, that means communication process is complete. You have any questions, you are becoming senders, you are asking me questions. So we are beginning another communication. So it makes it continuous and it puts an end to a communication. It sustains communication process. So communication process grows with the help of feedback. It makes one know if one is really communicating or making sense. It makes the sender know, are you successful in communicating or not? It is the basis for measuring the effectiveness of communication. We can measure the effectiveness of communication by feedback. Because feedback tells us, are we successful or are we fail in communicating ideas? It is good basis for planning on what next is to be done. By feedback, we can think about the next step. What should be done next? Communication will be useless without feedback. Obviously, communication is useless without feedback, and feedback paves the way for new idea generation. It is feedback which tells you how to generate new ideas, what to speak in the next lecture, what to speak in the next dialogue, how to be different from the previous communication. It can be shared to you. It is your feedback which tells you. The essentials of effective communication are as a common communication environment. We should have a common communication environment. Common communication environment requires content which is common and not language which is common. So by having common language and common content, we can create a communication environment. Then cooperation between the sender and the receiver. Unless and until if there is no cooperation between a sender and receiver, communication will not happen. It will never happen. Selection of an appropriate channel. Proper channel should be required. Then only the receiver can decode your message properly. Correct encoding and decoding of the message. If we are not able to encode our message according to the standard of the decoder, faulty communication will be there. If we do not decode the message according to the expectations of encoder or sender, again faulty communication will be there. So both the parties should know what is encoding and what is decoding and how to encode and decode a message. Receipt of the desired response and feedback. There should be a proper response of feedback from the side of the receiver. Without the proper feedback, communication is incomplete. So we cannot expect that communication will go on, it will prolong without proper feedback. So these are the main points which I have shared with you, discussed with you about the process of communication. So I talked about communication in the beginning, then I talked about some definitions, then I talked about communication process. Communication process requires sender it requires encoding, it requires a message, it requires channel, it requires receiver, it requires decoding, and the main important point is feedback, because I told you a lot of things about feedback. So without these points, we cannot be successful in the process of communication. So this is all for communication process. I hope you all have understood it well. So I would like to just stop here today. Thank you. Thank you for listening me patiently. Thank you once again.
Like, share, and subscribe. Hit the bell icon for more updates.